everyone. Welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and another episode of the Indie Show. We are talking Sandman Volume 9. So we are almost to the end of the original Neil Gaiman run here. And I got my Sandman crew with me. I got my man Unruly. What is going on? He's ready to go. We got our New York man, Comic Books NYC. What's going on, Cobby?
What's up? This is a very, very detailed and long volume of Sandman that I've now read a bazillion times since the last episode, but I'm good to go. Rest in peace, John Romita Sr. I had to get my Spectacular Spider-Man 2 out, and I'm a little bummed today, honestly, because of that, but let's get on with it.
All right. And last, but certainly not least, we got Jennifer, Comics from Break Your Heart. What is going on?
Hello. It is. This is a thick boy.
Yeah.
So the chat can like see behind the curtain a little bit. I just want to say, because Unruly, you messaged and you're like, what issues is this? And I'm like, well, the internet says that it's like 57 through 69, but like that's a lot. And then I'm like, oh wait, that's why it took me like days to get through this.
Yeah, it took me days to get through it for sure.
Yeah, I had it in my head that it was a 10-issue volume, but it's actually a 13-issue volume.
Yeah, it's a monster.
Yeah,
like I really said, I think some of the issues aren't exactly standard length, so I feel like some of them seem to go a long time. But we got a lot of ground to cover. We probably won't be quite as detailed as we normally are to get through this in a reasonable amount of time. But first off, thoughts on Volume 9. We're going to let Jennifer go first. What are your thoughts on the reread of Volume 9? What are just general thoughts?
So with this volume, I think the thing that struck me the most was, yes, how long the whole thing was, but the very direct change in artwork style. And even though there are multiple artists on this, the artwork feels very similar in style. What's his name? Mark Hempel does like the first, and then Charles Vest does another.
Charles Vest does half of Part 6.
Yeah.
Todd Christensen does issue 8, and then Mark Hempel does the majority of the rest of everything else and all the other issues.
Yeah, so it's a big change in the artwork style.
It is.
So, but even though I didn't necessarily love the change, I love that it was consistent across the whole volume, because almost every other volume that we've done has not been consistent, and it throws me off.
Right.
I get thrown off easily. Clearly. So that was my like initial impression of this.
Yeah. Was that really the art? Kavi, what about you? I know you're a big art guy, but what?
I was gonna say similar. Like the Hempel art to me, it's so from my understanding, when this was coming out, these issues 57 through 69, that there was pushback from the audience at the time about on this artist and this artwork. I wasn't aware of it at that time. I was too young to be, an active reader of this series when this was on the stands or whatever. But I feel like the Hempel artwork in particular has aged some of the best. I feel like, we're going, 20 some odd years later, like I think different people have different interpretations of the Sandman art that they like, that they dislike. And I feel like the Hempel artwork in particular, I guess maybe was hated more, or just was more divisive at the time. But I think now, upon reflection, 20 years later, it's almost like aged into itself in a way and feels very modern or current or just avant-garde in its own unique kind of cartoonish style, like less detailed, more abstract, but still kind of has this, I don't know, timeless element feel to it, right? I don't know. I think it's very poetic art style. I do love the Richard Case inking collaboration with Mark and Richard on some of the final 5 or 6 issues. Richard was more involved with the artwork, and it wasn't just Mark. It was kind of a collaboration between the two of them. And the Charles Vest like interlude artwork in that Part 6 is just, Charles Vest is incredible, and like he instantly transports you to this like fairy tale fantasy land that's so distinctly him. But yeah, I'm very fond of the artwork in this, and it kind of sets you up for this really unique journey that you go on in this 13 issues that connects a lot of dots. Like, yeah, you have the overall arching plot, right? But you also connect a lot of dots. There's a lot of callbacks to previous early volumes, a lot of scenes that are like reminiscent of early volumes, where like the whole story kind of comes full circle to me a lot, and I think to a lot of people in the journey of reading through this series. So yeah, I mean it's a particularly memorable volume in addition to being a lengthy one for me.
No.
Yeah.
And really, what about you?
Art wise, I gotta say I was one of those dudes back then that was pissing and moaning about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you to a point. It has aged better than I remembered.
Yeah.
The super, when he's drawing anything in the supernatural realm, I dig it.
Yeah.
When he's drawing ordinary people having ordinary interactions, I feel like I could dip my big toe in paint and do just as well. That's what I'm taking from it. But it has aged better.
Let me tell Mark that next time I see him at a show. I'm just kidding.
Slap him upside his Poindexter ears for me.
So
I understand that point of view though, like, and that's like, I mean, I had to do a little bit of research on my own to sort of get that take because I wasn't reading it when it was coming out like you, but I could see that for sure because it is a shift, a dramatic shift all of a sudden. So
for me, as the new reader coming at it from today and what we see in art today and everything else, I like a lot of the art for me has just been kind of okay throughout the volumes. It's fit the story, but I haven't been necessarily in love with the art style. In a lot of ways, I think this fits Sandman better than some of the other choices that have been made throughout, because I think the style and stuff, and particularly when you're talking about like the dream world and the fantastical stuff, I like it a lot.
It feels a lot more familiar to like the post Sandman, post Neil Gaiman Sandman stuff that has come out,
which I haven't read any of. So.
Which I haven't read a ton of it, but I've perused through more of the art than I have actually read. Yeah. I think the post Gaiman Sandman stuff, and I feel like Hempel's style was a reference point, I think, for a lot of the people that kind of carried on from there in a way.
Yeah. Okay. So this kind of, like you said, this kicks off like, and basically through the course of this, we touch back with almost everything. It kicks off with a little bit. Now, I had a question because we didn't talk about it the last time. Is the castle part of this, or is it like in between? Because I have this one issue that's different, and I was curious about like.
Yeah, so that's like a little prelude story that was published in a different book, like some one shot.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't actually consider that like.
Okay,
I mean,
I was curious because it wasn't part of the last volume, but it didn't feel like it was part of this either. So I was curious why
it's thrown in at the thrown in at the front of this trade paperback for whatever reason. I'm not 100. I mean, we could talk about it, I guess.
No, I was just curious because I didn't know if it actually, because it only sort of felt like it fit, and it was just weird. So yeah, we definitely don't have to talk about it. I was just curious about whether it was just me, because like when you get to the thing and you talk about the art style, when you get to the right off the bat with the kind of one, it's a very jarring page turn to get to the new art for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. We see sort of the kindly ones plotting from the beginning here, but I'm curious just overall, like, what do you guys think of how they kind of set this up and kick this into motion? Everything that's going to happen. Unruly, I'll let you go first this time. What did you think about how they kick this off and how this gets the slow build I feel like that we get here in terms of where we're going?
I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that, honestly, because and this just struck me. I just finished rereading it about an hour ago, and it was just seemed kind of a little bit on the contrived side. I love the characters.
I love that art, though. I don't know.
I love how Dream brought all this on himself in his wishy-washy Dream way, his passive-aggressive shit. But the kindly ones, and it's like, oh, but if you've drawn your own family blood, then we can revenge you. Where the fuck did that come from? Because Gaiman needed it to happen. But don't get me wrong, that's just a small nit I'm picking.
Well, I think this part one is kind of, it's just more of a table setting issue. Like you get Lyta Hall and Carla. They're kind of like a duo in this first half, or well, really the whole volume, but especially the first half. You establish that Lucifer and Mazikeen are at Lux kind of figuring out, or at least Lucifer's kind of figuring out, like, am I is what am I going to do after this or whatever. That's kind of like where his story falls. And really, the inciting incident doesn't really get revealed until like the last 2 pages, I think, where Daniel is, or Lyta Hall goes back to realize that Daniel's missing, right? Is that how this issue ends? Yeah. and
Yeah.
and that's really, I mean, that's the event that shakes up the whole thing, and you don't know it at the time. Like, the next couple issues kind of reveal the backstory of Loki and Puck, and I mean, Loki and Puck, the tricksters together is like some of my favorite shit in this. I mean, you got the Loki and Puck dynamic, and then you got the Corinthian 2 and Matthew the Raven dynamic, and they're both of their sort of little adventures are centered around Daniel in different ways, right?
Right.
And I like that setup because I feel like a lot of the characters are kind of split off into these duos, at least at the beginning of this. And then their stories get, intertwined from there pretty quickly. So I mean, I like it as far as setup, like, without getting into like philosophical reasoning behind why Dream thinks that he must make this sacrifice and all that. Like, I get that. I personally, like, I it doesn't annoy me or anything like that necessarily, because the rest of the story is very convoluted as well. Like, it's not, I can't choose to criticize this volume at that level without criticizing all the others, and at that
Right.
point it's like, do I enjoy this story or do I not? And I do. So I don't really think about it that hard as far as like, oh, like his reasonings, his justifications, like all that. Like, I feel like it's explained within the Morpheus prose without necessarily giving you a one-to-one, like, and this is the reason why I think I should die. Like, it's I don't know. I kind of, I'm all over the place when I talk about this book, but yeah, I kind of like where it starts off and how it starts developing. I don't even know if I realized the first time I read this that the cops were Loki and Puck. Like, I think it took my like second time I read it to like connect the dots that, oh, like, okay, so that's why the cops never heard of these cops, like, yeah, but I don't know.
Jennifer, what about you? What do you think of the way this sort of kicks off here?
One of the things that I realized when I was reading this time is you see a lot of character development, and even early on, the setup for a lot of these things develops so much of the characters, especially oh my god, what's the Raven's name? Matthew. So like, and what I realized is that, like, if you didn't have a favorite, like, non-big character, like, you obviously probably had like a favorite character of the Dreaming or one of the siblings, but if you didn't like already love Matthew, or if you didn't already love Merv, you're gonna really fall in love with them here. And it sets up, like, the beginning of this book, I think, sets up so well, to your point, like, we're pairing characters together to go on their journey throughout this volume.
Yeah.
But you get to the reason why Gaiman's doing that is because he's getting you to fall in love with these characters. And I think this made me fall in love with Matthew even more than I had already fallen in love with him. Especially at the beginning, because he's talking about, like, he's trying to figure out, like, hey, there have been other Ravens before. Can you tell me about him? So, like, his journey is basically just trying to figure out, like, who the fuck he is and maybe where he's going, where he wants to go.
Yeah, and I like how they he actually pays that off within the course of this volume. Like, especially, I don't remember if it was the 12th issue or the 13th issue, because there's so many issues, but
yeah.
When he does get more backstory about the Ravens, how many others that there are, like, some of them have now played other roles in the Dreaming. Lucian was the first Raven, which makes so much sense when you find that out. But you actually do finally find that out, kind of thing. Like there's a lot of payoff for me in a lot of the both side characters and the main characters in this volume.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for just a second, because rather than kind of go through this, the thing
because it would take forever. Like if we could just talk poetic about the whole thing. Really.
Yeah. So
yeah.
The thing I'm curious about for you guys is this thing jumps around a ton.
From character to character?
And from character to character. We basically touch base with almost every character that we've met.
Yeah, like it comes back a lot, and a lot of the people that maybe in the beginning you're like, oh, maybe they're going to be a throwaway character.
Right.
They come back.
Like Thessaly being the ex-girlfriend that he was all hung up on in volume 7.
Like totally like took me off guard, because they didn't act like they were on good terms to start with. And then we don't see any of it. He's just upset that he's lost a girlfriend, and then to find out it's her was so odd to me.
I know. So she sticks it to him by protecting her, and then later when he's presumably gone, and she's talking to Lyta after she wakes up, basically saying, "Well, now you're on my shit side because you killed him, or your choices led to killing him." It's interesting.
Yeah. So what are these side character? Which of the side stories that get brought back did you find most compelling? Is there anybody that, like, other than Matthew? I felt like Matthew sort of carried this volume for me in a lot of ways.
I'm a big fan of Corinthian 2. I mean, Corinthian 2 kind of goes hand in hand to Matthew's story to some degree. It's almost like Corinthian the good guy version, or like more, leaning more towards the light side than the dark side version, or but you're not really sure what he's gonna do. And I think having him in play with Loki and Puck and the Asgardians was a great decision, and I really enjoyed all the interplay between Loki, Puck, and even later Thor and Loki. Like when Loki is talking to him about the stuff he did to Thor's wife and Sif, like that shit is like, it's vile, but it's also hilarious.
Oh my god! So for those of you, sorry, really quick. So like in part of, I want to, for someone who maybe people who are watching who haven't like actually read this and are just listening, watching us talk about it. One of the stories that Loki is telling is he talks about tricking his brother into drinking oil. What is it? Oil and maybe it's just oil.
I remember the sequence, but I don't remember the liquid.
Drinking oil and something else, convincing his brother Thor that he is pregnant, and a squirrel goes in the window, and then Loki puts a cork in Thor's butt, and then Thor is just sitting there with a tummy ache. Loki has convinced Thor that he's pregnant. And a squirrel comes in the window and takes the cork out, gets covered in oil and shit, and Thor looks at this shit-covered squirrel, and because Loki has convinced him that he's pregnant, thinks this shit-covered squirrel is his baby. Like, I know that's so fucking silly, but like, I don't even know if that's like an actual like Norse mythology myth, if that's just, superb caveman storytelling right there. But man, that's just like a little tidbit, like a little jewel that we get from this.
Oh yeah.
Sorry to kind of like derail that, but
I feel like in some ways you telling that side story sums up my confusion and how I feel about this volume.
Okay, that's one of the things that made give me a poop joke in this, and I'm like, beautiful.
Because I think that's like the whole scene is really good storytelling. It's funny. It like, despite the fact that it's a poop joke, like it works on a level that like it's higher than just that. It's funny. It gets you to the core of who Loki is and kind of who Thor is. But was it necessary to the story he was telling here? Like, this thing goes on for like 13 chapters.
Right.
and we would jump to all these things that was going on with Rose and was going on with Loki and was going on with like all these other characters, and it wasn't that any of it was bad, but I just felt like why sometimes a bunch of times I felt like, why are we here? Like,
I feel like this volume might be the one exception to the rule that Sandman is better read in volumes or binge versus issue by issue. Like, I mean, considering that I feel like, yeah, there's connective tissue between all 13 of these issues and it's telling one complete story, but it's got so many side stories within the journey of that when you're sitting down to binge read it, you have to keep all those things in your head at the same time without time to think about that one issue.
And then I had to, I kept finding myself having to stop and go like, okay, who is this? What was their story before? Like trying to remember all these different characters and how they came and went before.
Yeah.
And what the setup was. And I just found it kind of daunting to like, and some of it I felt like was not that it was bad. It was just felt unnecessary to me. Unruly, what did you think about everywhere we're going here? You've been quiet for a minute.
All right, so unlike y'all, Matthew is the shit. And I love that Patton Oswalt does his voice in the series because I'm a Patton fan.
Same.
But if you remember who Matthew is, levity doesn't really become his character. He was truly, his memory of who he was as a man was completely wiped. Right. And that makes it even more interesting. But my favorite out of all these stories is without a doubt Loki, and it's the way this cat draws Loki is what I like out of all his artwork the best. But this is who Loki is, and the way Odin describes him towards the end is Loki is the snake that bites the hand that saves him. That's who Loki is.
Yeah,
right.
I love that about him. It's like
that's what he's literally trying to do to Morpheus. He's like, I'm in Morpheus's debt. I don't want to be in his debt, so let me screw him over, basically. Right?
Like Loki and Puck, and I realize they're characters that just like that.
Huck is just like chaos, I think.
Yeah,
like, I don't think he doesn't really have an agenda. He's just like, let's just get up to some trouble.
Yeah, but their motivation here is odd, like that they are the things. So this is where I come back to, and I feel like maybe we're skipping to the end, but since we're just kind of jumping around here, was this all? I feel like this is all Morpheus. Like he did all of this, maybe not completely consciously, but like he, from the beginning that he escaped, he's been setting this up because he was done. Like when he was trapped in the thing, he decided he was done, and he never recovered.
I don't know if he necessarily is doing this because he thinks he's done, but I think that he understands now because he was trapped, maybe how futile it is, and he's realizing, even though he's really powerful, like what does that power mean?
Yeah, I guess done is the wrong word.
I'm more with that than he was done per se, because I think there was still a journey to get to the point where he had to kill his actual son, you know?
Right, but I guess for me it was more of like I guess done is the wrong word, but he realized that he couldn't be Dream anymore. Like he had come to the
I agree with that.
And so like he did all of this to me. Like all of this, and he the whole time, even as he's going through it, he's like, "Oh, this is it." And it's like you're doing it, like you're setting all these wheels in motion.
The call is coming from inside the house, Morpheus.
I mean, am I wrong? Does that everybody else feel that way? That this is really just him? Go ahead, Unruly.
Marvel by the Month just said it. He knows he needs to change, and he can't do it himself.
Yeah, and that's the point that his sister Death made to him in that final sequence, essentially, of before he passes, that he's never going to give up the responsibility, but he was going to kind of set up his exit, Yeah. So I know what you're saying. I think what you're saying is a harsher version than what it actually is, but yes, I know what you mean.
Well, his exit and his eventual return, because the new Dream is still got a kernel of him at the heart of it.
Well, I haven't read that part yet, but
Well, you did. You saw Daniel becoming Dream too.
They're the endless. Endless. It says it
Yeah.
right there in their name.
well, like you see it, but I mean, like all I get is
maybe
no.
you didn't grab that understanding when you saw it, but that's what's happening.
No, well, I get just based on the look that he's probably going to be very similar, but we don't get enough of it to know how he's actually going to function here.
So calling back to like stuff that kind of came back around though, and some other plot lines, the Rose Walker thing, like, you know, there were parts of it that I liked, like especially her actually meeting Desire, you know, her grandfather essentially, and I guess getting that piece of her heart back or whatever, you know, that she gave to Unity Kincaid, and you know, like there was a lot of stuff from the Doll's House that came back around.
Right.
Which didn't really feel like it had come back around in a minute for me, the last couple volumes, and I liked seeing that kind of connective tissue to some of those older plot lines, like even the you know, I guess the guy that she met that she had the fling with, who I guess later ended up being like a married guy and like it didn't work out or whatever.
Right.
But that was somebody related to somebody that you met, you know, way back at Doll's House and stuff. And so there was a lot of, I guess, you know, connecting the dots to, you know, I think some of those earlier important, very key storylines in the earlier volumes.
I think that was my favorite out of all of the like reoccurring characters that we saw in the storyline. I loved seeing Rose again. I loved seeing where she's at. So anyways, and like you said, all of the throwbacks to all of the other characters as well. Excuse me, y'all.
Get some water.
Yeah.
Cough drop or something.
Sorry. So I loved seeing Rose again a lot, and I loved seeing her progression as a character. Give me a second, y'all. Talk amongst
No, you're okay.
You're good.
Yeah. So, and I would agree with, like, it's not that, just to go back to my other point, it's not that I minded seeing the characters, and it's not that a lot of these scenes weren't well written, because they were all well written, but it just felt like we spent a lot of time with Rose, and I like Rose, but it just felt odd. They felt like odd asides at times to the bigger story arc that's going on here, and it's like, well, I'm wrapping up everything in this volume, so I'm wrapping up everything in this volume. It's sort of what it felt like.
I think
whether it plays a role in Dream's progression here or not. Like, if that makes sense.
I know we spent like half this episode talking about Matthew already, but one more point about Matthew is in that part 13, there's a page where Matthew Corinthian 2 attempts an attack on Matthew, and then, you know, within like 2 pages, you know, he's like, never mind, I don't need to kill you anymore, kind of thing, right? But Neil Gaiman originally was going to kill Matthew on that page. He was going to have Corinthian 2 kill Matthew, and I think Karen Berger's like assistant editor or something like that had
Shelley.
She had a kid named Matthew or something like that, like just recently, and she basically begged Neil to figure out a way to like keep Matthew in it, and he reversed course and didn't kill Matthew in that sequence.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I would not have.
But that on the original script for that issue was Corinthian 2 killing Matthew on that page.
It seems, yeah.
Well, I would like to point out some esoterica here.
Ooh.
I did not like seeing Gilbert die.
No.
I did not like seeing Abel die.
Or Merv.
You know, y'all can like Merv all you want. He's a piece of
shit. You think he deserved it?
That's why I love him.
Nah, I love Merv. Merv is better than Fiddler's Green for me personally. Like,
yeah.
As a character, like I'm not saying Fiddler's Green sucks, but yeah.
But I did love how over the course of this series we learned more about Cain and Abel than in 3 decades previous in their own books.
Yeah.
Right. Don't you mean 2,000 years previous?
Yeah.
There is a good line concerning that somewhere.
I meant that as a joke. by the way,
No,
for
no,
anybody
no, I know.
for anybody out there, I'm not a Bible expert by any means.
So here's where I get to, I guess, like coming back to my thing is I feel like where I think Dream really like causes all of this is that like when he tells Lyda at the way back, he's like, your son belongs to me and someday I'll come for him. And it was like, sets up all of this. Like, and she just goes crazy, like, it causes
assuming that he was the killer or
that he was the culprit. And
I loved that though. I loved seeing her get her like revenge. I really loved her storyline. Like,
but did she get revenge? She caused her greatest fear.
I still think I love seeing women burn shit to the ground. Okay, and that's exactly what she does. And I love it. I'm here.
She tries to. I mean, to her credit, she tries to change
and women's wrongs. Okay, and that's what she does. Is I support women's wrongs.
When she realizes that Dream didn't take Daniel, like she kind of pleads with the kindly ones to, he didn't do it, so we don't have to kill him, and it's their decision to continue to punish him for killing Orpheus. So so yes and no on that revenge.
Well, I don't feel like here's my problem with that, with the comment you have there, Jennifer. For me, is I don't feel like she's trying to burn it to the ground, but she's not. She's been manipulated to burn it to the ground. It's not really her. Like she's been played.
I would still say it's like her using her power to do so, though, and so that's a conscious thing that she is doing.
She's been tricked.
She has been manipulated and
she doesn't want this to happen anymore, and it goes on without her. So they used her to make this happen. They used her rage to make this happen. So
I still think her rage is valid, though. Her rage is valid.
Yes,
I'm not saying that's not what I'm saying, though. Like, I get she was manipulated in a way. So like they took her agency from her. They tricked her into doing what they wanted. So for me, that didn't play as well because I felt like she just got manipulated.
I still loved it. I mean, even though it is kind of sad because you in this volume you see her traveling and it's almost like Delirium would travel where she's walking through the streets and like maybe it's raining and she ends up
she's both in the land of myth and the reality of the city at the same time. It's really cool.
I do think that even though like that is kind of sad because maybe she doesn't know what she's doing, I think she is very conscious of like someone still fucked with me and I don't care who it was, whether it's the people who are manipulating me or the person who I'm after, I'm still going to use my rage to get my revenge. Like I'm looking for revenge.
But she doesn't get revenge. She causes what she feared to happen.
Pour one out for Carla, though. I mean, she's a real one. She was a good friend. And Loki, Loki took her off the board. And
I know, but
I just want to see women burn shit to the ground, okay?
Corinthian
just
took her off.
Have that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I was surprised that you felt that way because I figured you would feel the way I felt about more like the way I felt about it which was I felt like it got stolen from her in a way that because she got used in this way.
No, I can reconcile both your points of view. She is manipulated and used and ill-used, but she's doing what with the information she has. She's taken the best. She has taken the best course available to her. If you stole my kid, I would kill your whole freaking family and not even lose a minute of sleep.
Yeah, she doesn't have the benefit of having all our insight as the reader.
So she,
I guess I feel like when it gets to the end, it's like, and when and I can't remember the other the lady that protects her, and then it's like man at her end.
That's like
like that conversation to me sums up her whole journey, and it makes me actually feel like it's why I don't feel good about her journey because it feels like she did all of this, and actually all she did was cause the thing that she feared. So they actually just used all the power she had against her. And so I don't know. For me, I felt it didn't work for me in a way that it clearly worked for Jennifer. So.
Like it didn't have the payoff. Like if that was you, if you had like burned everything to the ground with false information, you'd be like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. But I still feel like if that was me, I would still feel like my rage was justified.
See, I would not. I would feel like if I hurt people that didn't deserve it, then I would be like, if I hurt people that deserved it, yes. But if I hurt people that didn't deserve it, then that would not make me, like, that would ruin me.
Mm.
You're trying to play angel's advocate to me, and
one
I'm
of the
trying to
things
be devil's advocate.
One of the things that confused me about her story arc is like that whole introduction of these other two sisters, like Medusa's sisters, I think, from Greek mythology.
Trying to trick her into becoming another.
They're trying to trick her to becoming one of their sisters, but they weren't the kindly ones. They were those were other characters, right? So I was like,
that's one of the other things that was like her.
That's one of the more confusing moments or sections where for me where it's like, okay, like I know I've read this like 4 other times, and why can't I get this part? You know, like
why are they trying to turn into Medusa?
You don't see them a lot, so there's not like a good strong visual reference for them as well, but maybe that's the point.
Yeah,
probably.
One of the other things that I noted throughout the whole thing that I didn't catch in any previous reads is several different female characters in this are just fed up with men and are just like every single female protagonist in this book at some point says like, God damn it, men. Like, men. It's said like 5 or 6 times in this volume, and I was that's
when the 3 older ladies at the nursing home are telling their stories. That was a good.
Yeah.
What I
think Thessaly said that also. Like, I think in her final panel, her final scene.
Go ahead.
We have two great scenes where one entity is threatening another entity, just cutthroat. When Lucifer is the other angel, Remiel,
Duma and Remiel,
I could wipe out your existence, but I choose not to. But even better is when Delirium is outside the club with Mazakim, and she goes, if you don't let me in, I will turn you into a demon, half-faced waitress nightclub lady with a crush on her boss, and I'll make it so you've been that way from the beginning of time to now, and you'll never know if you were anything else, and it will itch inside your head worse than bugs. What a great threat, man. That's like if somebody came up to see and said, I will make you believe you're a freaking alcoholic plumber and you'll never know any different. Like,
That's my favorite written passage of this whole volume is this one panel right here.
Yep, there it is.
Where Delirium, she says, our existence deforms the universe. That's responsibility. I love that line so much. Might be my favorite line in Sandman of the whole book.
Yeah. It's a good one.
It's really good.
So the other character that I feel like that gets sort of tricked into playing a role in his downfall, and I'm curious what you guys think of Nala's journey here.
Nuala's journey,
I don't know how I just pronounce it Nala. I just silent the U and just go with it.
I don't know actually how you're supposed to pronounce it.
But yeah, so what do you think of her in this? I'm curious to see. I'm going to let Jennifer go first this time. I'm curious what she thinks of her in this arc.
I liked the story as a whole, but that was one of the stories where I almost felt like could have been left out or maybe like truncated a little bit.
Yeah.
That was the one that not necessarily felt like too much, but yeah, I felt like that could have been left out, even though it was a really good story. But
Tavi, what about you? What did you think of her?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the similar page. Like it's you have to kind of take a leap of faith because it's not like they give you in the last, let's say 2-3 volumes. It's not like they give you so many scenes between her and Morpheus that you gain a significant understanding, like going into this volume, how much she's in love with him and stuff. And I have that memorization of that fact, so it's like I think it's probably less jarring because as a rereader,
I wish that it had been like its own issue.
Sure, exactly. Me too. Yeah, exactly.
Instead of threaded throughout the 13.
Right, a little more like pre-convincing of that fact, I think would have added, I think, more weight or significance to that element of her story. But overall, I liked her story. I liked how you know, she's fighting essentially to be in her true nature and not, you know, whatever with all the fairy magic, you know, and that kind of stuff. I like how she handles her brother and her you know, her family, right?
Right.
In that whole thing, I like the sort of it's your choice, but you know, but ultimately it's the thing that brings a dream down, is, you know, right, kind of thing. So it, you know, it adds this element of like, okay, was it predestined or was it free will, you know, like that's where her story kind of is the crux of this volume in a way, without her being a main character, lead character, you know, what endless character, but she's very important to this story, without being a main character, you know.
But you, Unruly, what did you think of?
But I could have spent more time in the fairy world. You know, the way Gaiman portrays them, the way they're originally portrayed in mythology and fairy tales. You know, they're not happy-go-lucky creatures. They're soulless. They're immortals with no souls, and they love nothing more than to stab each other in the back, only doing it in a very contrived, roundabout way. I love how Cluracan and his sister, they really do have genuine affection for each other, which is not something that is at all common in Fae. I really enjoyed that whole aspect. I'd like to see him write a series with nothing but those critters.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
No. I just thought it was interesting because you really, like, she's been this timid side just there the whole time since she was introduced, and to see her take agency, and again, much like with Lyta, like take agency, and then by doing so brings about the thing she doesn't want to happen. It's like, seems to be a big theme here, and like what Gaiman's doing is every time somebody tries to take agency for like what's happening to them, they actually bring about what they're trying to stop from happening. Is where, but
because of rules. Because of rules, JP. Because of rules.
So the other characters, I'm curious of, what do you guys think of the kindly ones in this? Because there's the motivation I don't really understand. Like, because they're supposed to be sort of just, I mean, I get that they're often portrayed as petty and everything else, but they're also sort of just above it all, like to a certain degree. And we see them like, they're like above it all at the beginning, and at the end, it's like, yeah, that was no big deal. But yet during, they're like, because even when she's like, no, I don't want this to happen anymore, and they're like, no, we're gonna make it, like, they get very like, what do you think of the kindly ones? I'll let Unruly go first this time.
Well, it's sort of, all right, let me make a comparison. The Watcher in the Marvel Universe, he's all-seeing, all-knowing. He's just recording events. He is sworn to never interfere in the affairs of man, but he does it all the freaking time, and sometimes for petty reasons. I think they're sort of the same way. When they have a chance to act outside their role, they go for it with a gusto. You know what I'm saying? And that's all the motivation they needed.
Yeah, I thought about going down a Greek mythology or just mythology rabbit hole about, because like if you go look up the actual names of the kindly ones and like they're like, you know, who they're based off of, you could draw other conclusions or certain conclusions, but I didn't do that, and I don't think I think I'd probably be just spinning my wheels doing that. I'm pretty much on the same page as Unruly, where they kind of act as this you know, non-god, non-endless, another variable in the universe, right? That has both passive control and active control, seemingly, on events, but you don't really know, like, to your other point about, you know, it was dreams, plan the whole time, or Dream was setting this up the whole time. It's like it's hard to truly know one way or the other where what they did was their decision or not either.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you, but I also never thought too hard about it because I don't want to like, because that's the kind of thinking that frustrates you on a story like Sandman. You know what I mean? I mean, it sounds funny, but it's the truth. Like if you overthink Sandman, you're not going to like it as much because it's meant to be abstract. Like I'm meant to have a different sort of reaction to that than you are, you know, based on who I am as a person, the other stories I've read, the other mythologies that I've been exposed to. And I think that's what makes a good writing for me anyway. I tend to gravitate towards stories that have those kind of abstract overall lessons, right? Where it's like you kind of get at what the lesson is, you know where the story is, but you didn't necessarily interpret it the same way as everybody else did. And I like that. Like I like my straight, you know, I like my big two superhero comics also, like, but Sandman is on this other level of where like four different people have these like uniquely interesting different reactions, but with a lot of overlap with, you know, things as well. But yeah, this volume in particular and Brief Lives, I think, you know, I don't remember which number that was as far as the volumes, but and I think it was volume 4. That was the first one with the meeting of all the endless, or was that volume 3?
I don't remember.
Maybe it was 3, but yeah, those are my favorite volumes of Sandman, I would say. And so, I mean, I don't know, it's nice to be able to get back to this point in the storyline, because I think I've reread Sandman several times since I first read it, and a few different times I never got this far in my reread.
Right.
You know, but it feels like a real reward to me to get to this volume when rereading it. So,
Jennifer, what about you? What do you think of the kindly ones here?
So the thing that I love about Neil Gaiman and the way that he uses mythology in his stories, I really enjoy the way that he uses the kindly ones, because they're supposed to be, even though you're not supposed to call them this, like the Furies or the Fates. And we see how not only how he uses how they're used in like traditional mythology, but then maybe how Shakespeare would have used them in mythology and how they're like threaded through there. And the thing that he does really, really well is he doesn't just show them as these like figureheads or these like bigger than life. He shows these small moments, and that's what I really like that he does, even if it may not necessarily be the biggest part of the story, or they may not be a main character. I do really love the way that he uses them, not only as these larger than life characters that are almost adjacent to the endless, but that he uses them, like he shows the small intimate moments where, like, I think at the beginning, like they're knitting, and you know that's part of the whole, like the threads and the.
I like how they're off
weaving.
camera a lot. You know,
Yeah.
I feel like he could have thrown them in there as far as like visuals, and it was more effective not to have them there, I think, when a lot of those death scenes were going down. And like the Todd Klein lettering, like even the color, the like blood red color around the lettering box for any time that they spoke, like I don't know, there's some real subtle choices made in this volume to sort of make them feel very, very mysterious and important.
Yeah, so I really don't think that it would be a Neil Gaiman story. Like, yes, he's using a lot of things from mythology. Like, obviously, he's using Loki, and he's used some other figures from the like other mythologies. Excuse me, y'all. But it wouldn't be one of his stories if he didn't like make that like larger than life character and make them human. Like, he's literally making them more human, I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right, I know, Jen, you're up against a fairly hard deadline here, so
I think we covered it, man.
I think that
I want to cover one more scene before I get to final thoughts real quick, which is Death and Dream in this final volume. So Jennifer, I'll let you go first to make sure you have time to get it in.
Of course. So I love any moment where Death and Dream get to talk, because Death is always so good at maybe bringing Dream back down to size, and maybe even the conversation that she's having here with him is still like kind of saying like, do you accept what you've done? Do you accept your like role in all of this? Are you sure this is what you want to do? So she's always like holding him accountable, I guess, but then also doing it with so much compassion, which is so what Death would be doing. My only like, I don't know. I love these moments, and there's so many throwbacks to their first meeting when they talk about like throwing the bread at him.
This is
like,
the Star Wars. This is like the Star Wars George
pigeons,
Lucas everything rhymes moment for me.
Like she says something about like, oh, do you want me to get some pigeons here? Or so there's like this throwback to the first time. Yeah. So
callback was great.
There's so many moments where it's like, hey, remember when we first encountered each other in what is issue 9? 8. So anyways, I love that. I love their relationship because you can tell that they have the best maybe relationship out of everyone that's not so parasitic.
Right.
Yeah.
Callie,
this is that page, by the way, that Matthew was supposed to die, but instead he misses and hits this other creature or whatever. So that was the change that was made. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm with the same. I kind of said that it reminds me of, the George Lucas thing that he would always used to say, how like stories, it's like it rhymes. This issue rhymed with issue 8. Like not literally 1-to-1, but it just brought you to that same kind of space, that little quiet moment between them. But the stakes are so much higher now, and so that's like. That really that's what elevated writing should be like, or feel like for the end reader, that issue 8 was important because it's the first time you're meeting this character and it's their first major interaction, but this rhymes with that to such a degree, but is so much, but absolutely everything is at stake during this issue, right? For at least for Morpheus's journey. So I loved it. I don't really know if there's a ton else to say about it. It's pretty sparse with the dialogue. Like it's just what needs to be said, and it's just perfect, just enough. And I think the artwork is what makes it really powerful to me in that like those vertical, those lengthy vertical panels, and that on that double page spread, it's like one of the I mean, obviously it's one of the most important sequences in Sandman, but I love the choice in the way that the panel layout was on those, and on the next page, which is I guess the death page officially. So I thought that was just great choice from, I don't know if that was Mark Hempel's idea or Neil's idea, but however they collaborated on it, I think it was the right way to go. The end there.
And really, what about you, real quick?
Yeah, their dialogue was excellent. He's like, she tells him destruction simply left. It was no longer his affair and took off into the forever. You could have done that.
Yeah.
No, I could not. And she rests her head on his shoulder and says,
like,
no,
you would never be able to just give it up. Yeah.
And that sums it up. But then she does tell him at the very end, you've been setting this up all along. And he's like, if you say so.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. All right. Final thoughts on Volume 9. Overall, just what do you think about it? Jennifer, I'll let you go first again in case you have to bail. So.
I didn't remember how much I really loved this volume, I think. Like I said at the beginning, the artwork is a lot more jarring for what I remember with Sandman. Initially, be like, the rest of the series, the artwork, I don't want to say feels more grown up, and this feels more cartoonish in style. But I really, really like that the artwork is a lot more consistent across the entire volume. And going into it, this is where all of the pieces fit together. This is where we get all those throwback characters, and we get to see how so many of their stories are concluding or are about to conclude. Like I felt really, really like jazzed during these rereads of this.
Yeah. Okay. Copy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've said a lot about it. I really like this volume. I hate picking favorites, but this is on the short list of, you know, favorite volumes for me. Brief Lives and the first. I don't know why it's escaping me. Season of Mists, I think, is the volume where the Endless have their first like family gathering meeting. That one.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
remember.
So I like The Wake as well. I think Michael Zulli's artwork is like the total opposite of Mark Hempel's. It's like so realistic and in like this classical, timeless kind of way, and that's another kind of jarring difference. But it's all intentional. Like I think Neil had Michael Zulli's artwork in mind for The Wake, and he had Mark Hempel's in mind for the Kindly Ones, and he specifically made that choice going into sort of the art direction of the end of the story. So I'm a big fan of Sandman, and these are some of the most standout, iconic main plots and subplots that the story has had. So yeah, big fan of it.
And really, you don't like it, right?
Like everybody's remarked upon, I loved seeing all the characters come together. It was like he reweaved this tapestry and then pulled the main thread by taking death out of it, but it didn't unravel the tapestry.
Yeah.
Right.
So for me, I was hoping maybe this discussion would give me a little more clarity on how I actually feel about this volume, and it didn't really. I still feel a little bit torn. I really
Just
really
say you don't like it. You're allowed to say.
Well, so like it's just weird. Because I'm torn because I
think you're more torn about your interpretation of it compared to what your expectations were, maybe. Yeah. I mean, because if you compare it to some of the weaker volumes, like I can't, it's all relative,
where
right?
I was trying to go is like the writing is really, really good. And like the scenes with like that scene with him and Death at the end, and the scene that we didn't really talk about, him and Matthew before when he's sending Matthew away.
Yeah, that's great.
And like there's so many really just well written, well thought, like, but for me, I feel like it loses its way at times. And maybe you were talking about if you overthink it, and maybe I'm overthinking it because like
literally is what it is.
The whole stuff like fucking Loki. I realize they're chaos. Why? And like there's so much stuff that doesn't
it's kind of a double standard because Neil Gaiman asks you to think like as a writer, he challenges his readers, right? He asks of you a lot, and then sometimes you think so hard about it or so in one direction about it that when he kind of like changes it up and goes it in a way that you don't expect necessarily, it might totally mess up your like I said, your expectations.
There were just a few things for me that didn't connect in a way that made sense as to why the characters' motivation, why they were doing certain things based on what their motivations should have been based on what we'd read before. And there's a few things in there that's like, why are they doing this? What's their motivation for doing this? And the only thing I could come back to, and this is where I came back to, you guys were saying I was a little harsh on Dream, is that like the only reason they're doing this is because he's basically made them do this. Like, and that's the only way the motivations make sense across a lot of this, is that he's really, and her line at the end is he says, if you say so, but no, you did. Like, you actively had to.
Right, but that very thing is up for interpretation. That's what makes it great writing,
But so I mean, I like it, but
I think my overall point is like, what's better, a story that's literally told to you like 1-to-1 and you have a complete comprehensive understanding of it? Yeah, there's a lot of positives with that. But then B, it's like, okay, the kind of story that creates this kind of debate and or hypothetical philosophical
I'm okay with
debate.
like how much of this dream, like how conscious Dream was that he was causing this. I'm okay with that being abstract.
Yeah.
I just was like, I felt like some of the character motivations for why they played their part in this weren't necessarily consistent with where they had been the last time we saw them or we read them. And so that's where I had a little bit of a like, okay.
Well, one more volume to go.
Yeah. Well, I realize that. Yes.
But since when are people consistent or make sense?
No, well,
there's that.
There's
Yeah.
that true. So there's definitely that too. What if Neil Gaiman's writing it? It better make sense. Come on. All right. Well, we were going to get out of here because I know Jennifer's got somewhere else she's got to be. I want to thank this amazing panel for hanging out with me for 9 volumes. We got at least one more, and maybe we'll pick a few extra Sandman stuff to talk about too.
The Death book is probably the next one.
I have the Death book over there. We're definitely going to do that. So with that, I want to thank Tacoma, Bronze Page, Hoarder's Hide, Jay Nunya, Bub. Let's see, we got Marvel by the Month, Perry, everybody that hung out with us earlier, Kenneth, QT Key, what's going on, everyone? Thank you all for stopping by. And yeah, we will catch you guys later.
Night.